Hello, beautiful humans, wherever you are. Today's conversation features two wonderful humans, Lezah and Dario. They're therapists, and they are a couple in a beautiful and loving relationship with each other. In this episode, we dive into therapy and what does it mean to be a therapist in this day and age? What does it mean to date another therapist who comes from a different background? What does it mean to be in a loving relationship, knowing that these relationships are not necessarily free of conflict, but this conflict can bring people closer together versus pushing people further apart? How they navigate the end of their honeymoon period and how they hope their love to evolve and shift in old age. This truly made my heart sing and made me so grateful for connecting with Lezah and through Lezah connecting with Dario. I hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you do, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing so that other people can listen to this beautiful conversation and be inspired to shift their perspectives on romantic connection and or shift how they show up. And quick PS before we dive into the episode, I've opened up a few coaching spots this fall 2023 to work with me as a life coach. I help women and BIPOC folks reconnect with their wholeness and their joy. This is something that has a special place in my heart, given how 2 years ago I was that burnt out high achiever working a 6-figure job and feeling like I had everything that I needed, that I wanted to be and feel successful, be and feel fulfilled, yet I didn't feel it at my core. I was feeling empty. And the journey that I went on, the tools that I used, the wisdom that I uncovered, I would love to share with you if you are in a similar boat, if you've taken a beat and you feel burnt out and you feel unfulfilled and feel like there must be a higher purpose for me. I'm not sure if this job, this relationship fits the person that I've become or intend to become. If any of those things resonate with you, DM me, message me on Instagram, and we'll talk. We'll set up a free 60-minute clarity call to see whether or not there's a good fit. As a reminder, the life that you want, the person you intend to embody is available and it is waiting for you to arrive. And if you need support arriving, landing, walking that path, I'm available and I'm ready for you. So without further ado, let's dive into this beautiful episode and my first of, I hope, many episodes featuring 2+ guests. Hi everyone, welcome back to Ampersand. I'm your host Jenny, and today I have two wonderful guests on, my friend Lezah and her partner Dario. Welcome to the podcast. Lezah is a licensed marriage and family therapist who works with people of all walks of life, especially those who have experienced childhood trauma. She became a therapist because of her own mental health journey and which has been one of the most powerful, painful, rewarding parts of her life. She's passionate about being an ally and witness to others as they navigate their human experience. She deeply believes healing is possible and loves to continue to explore healing spiritual practices beyond the Western clinical model. And Dario is a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in working with families with a particular focus on strengthening parent-child relationships, grief, and acculturation. As a Latino man, his work aims to bring mental health awareness, access, and healing to his community in ways that honor the values of familia and culture. Thank you both for joining. I'm so excited to have you on.
Thanks so much for having us, Jenny. We're so excited to be here with you. I love you so much.
Oh,
Thank you
love
for
you
the opportunity.
too.
Really appreciate it. Of course, of course. I think you two, first of all, have such an interesting story, not only from coming from different backgrounds, but bringing your love of mental health and emotional care and just supporting each other to not only your relationship, but to your work lives. And I also think this is such an interesting time to talk about therapy in general, because as you two know, I feel like we're in this age of mental health awareness. I feel like whenever I go on platforms like Instagram, like TikTok, I can probably find a variety of folks to follow. And I feel like there's a lot more understanding, right? This vocabulary around, attachment styles, shadow work, like who Freud is, id, the ego, the super ego. So I'm really curious from both your perspectives, what does it mean to be a therapist in this day and age where there is, I wouldn't say completely no stigma, but there's less stigma and more language around what does it mean to engage in therapy?
I have so much to say about this. You know, let's see. When I first decided to become a therapist, it was pretty simple, right? I just wanted to be someone that helped other people in the ways that I myself have been helped in my life, right? Like for me, my mental health was one of the biggest characters in the movie of my life, for better or for worse. And, there was no way that I could have navigated that alone. And so it just kind of felt like to be a therapist was to use the experiences that I had for, positive purpose. And that's kind of where it started. But as I've continued on this journey and my understanding of wellness and my understanding of healing has evolved, I see, today we're living in a crisis, a multiple dimensioned crisis. We have a mental health crisis, we have an ecological crisis, we have social crises all over. And I think they're all related. They're all connected. We can't separate ourselves from the earth. We can't separate ourselves from our communities. We can't, separate ourselves from the systems in which we live. And I think historically, the field of therapy has done that. They've looked at people as isolated individuals who, if you experience symptoms of anxiety or depression or whatever you're struggling with, then there must be something wrong inside of you. And come to therapy and we'll fix you right up and make you feel happy and make you feel good because that's what's normal. And I think that, of course we all want to feel good. We all want to reduce our suffering. I too want to feel good most of the time. But I think what I'm starting to understand is that it is actually not normal to feel no pain when our world is truly falling apart around us, right? Like it is more normal. In fact, let's just use the example of almost every child and teenager that I work with really struggles with like intense anxiety and, gets diagnosed with things like ADHD, etc. Gets medicated, right? I think it's more normal to feel like that than it is to just be blissfully ignorant of the fact that it's not great to sit in a desk for 8 hours a day and to kind of have your creative freedom repressed and to be told that you need to be a certain way and fit this box. I actually think that pathologizing people that don't fit that box is perpetuating systems of colonization and capitalism and oppression that are sorry, I'm going on. Here I am on my soapbox. I see therapy as either something that can perpetuate the systems that are currently keeping us in this disconnected trance from reality, or being a very radical field in which we are helping people to see that their feelings, their emotions contain wisdom that, if harnessed, can lead to a collective consciousness shift and awakening. So it's been a journey. I'll let you have some words. I'm sorry, this is my
That's a
passion.
beautiful response.
Yeah, no. I mean, just to piggyback on what you mentioned, Jenny, and also what Lisa's mentioned, this has been something that's been growing. The acknowledgement of mental health, well-being, how that impacts us in our day-to-day life. I mean, growing from being a child of the 90s, mentioning depression or anxiety was taboo. Coming from the family that I came from, my parents would not acknowledge mental health issues as a priority thing, right? It's something that if you have issues, you need to get over it, or it's just in your head, right? Coming to the 2000s, I think that's where we started to, acknowledge mental health a little bit more. But in that 2000s era, the early 2000s, we were more about labeling. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, and how do we treat it? Medication, right? Talk therapy wasn't so acknowledged or talked about as it is now in this era or in this decade. I think we've been growing as a society to see the importance of mental health in our society and as an individual part. I think now being in 2020s, we are seeing that, we've also done harm by labeling, right? By saying this person has, bipolar, or this person is bipolar is what we used to say. And I was like, this person is, has symptoms or is suffering from bipolar disorder symptoms. I think we've also come, I think I was lucky to just come in the right time in my master's degrees where we were talking about mindfulness and acceptance. And I think that's really what therapy has become now, at least in my practice, where it's like everything that we're going through, every individual goes through their own challenges, their own struggles, and it's unique and yet still comparable and relatable. I think when people come to therapy, I hope, at least when they come to therapy with me, the main three things is we acknowledge their experience, we hold the experience, and we're accepting of what it means for them. Something that I like to tell my clients is, you're the expert. Whatever you say is true. This is your experience, and it does not mean that you have a problem or that there's something wrong with you. It just means that you are processing something that is conflicting. And whenever we go through something that is conflictual, we tend to, battle it, try and make sense of it. Depression, anxiety, inattention, hyperactivity is really a normal thing in every one of us. I think just, being in a system, any kind of system, any social system, if you don't fit the norm, someone will want to say that there's something wrong with you. But in reality, it's just you don't fit that norm that they want you to, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you.
You have to question the norms by which we're being compared against.
100%. That's so true. Yeah, I love what both of you said. I think there's just so much truth in, like, just, I guess going back to something you said, Lezah, just this idea that we sometimes have this tendency to pathologize, like, feelings of anxiety, feelings of inadequacy, just feeling that we feel like life is meant to be a constant state of bliss. Yet when we compare ourselves to that level of perfection that is frankly not possible to achieve, it can make us just feel like we're not normal. And I know I've navigated a lot of that myself, just wondering, how in some ways, I feel like I'm the black sheep in my family for, having gone against the norm, for going to therapy, for pursuing alternative methods of healing. So it's so refreshing to hear both of you talk about how there is this movement. There are people like you two who are very much shifting this paradigm, creating more space for people to accept themselves and bear witness to what's coming up for them without creating suffering within their own being by allowing it to exist, which I think is so lovely. But I'm also curious too, since you both come from such kind of different backgrounds, not only in terms of like the bios that I mentioned, but like, from a gender standpoint, right? From an ethnicity and possibly from a just like the income level from which you were raised. I'm curious how you think about weaving those parts of your identity into the containers that you hold for others, and perhaps also the containers you hold for each other.
If you don't mind, I could probably
Go
bring
for
something
it.
up.
Go for
You know,
it.
so I'm Latino. Ethnicity wise, race wise, I'm Nicaraguense and Mexican. And even that comes within its own complexities in the Latino culture, where even though we're considered Latinos in the same ethnic, grouping, there's a lot of there's a lot of differentiation between both cultures. Being a first generation Latino born in the United States, low socioeconomics, first person, go to higher education. There is a lot of acculturation to go through. I believe that me going in that type of background, really, what I brought to therapy, or what I try to bring to therapy, is um, familismo, um, the external factors that create our stresses or our mental health distress. Socioeconomics plays a big role in our health. One thing that I really go to is our hierarchy of needs. We first need to feel safe, that we have a home, that we have food, that we have outside support. Something that I've dealt with a lot of parents with their children in therapy is school systems. It's an advocacy. Most parents that I've talked to, I've been working with advocating for themselves and speaking what they feel needs to be spoken. There has been like an experience of most parents thinking that the school system is perfect, that whatever they're saying must be right because they're the experts. So sometimes the kids have behavioral issues and the school is blaming it on the parents. But in reality, it's just the environment in school that's creating the stress for the child that has nothing to do with home. So even that factor of these external things and how to navigate and how to advocate about boundary setting, assertive communication is very important in my therapy, so that they could, really speak their minds instead of just saying, yes, I think they're right because they're the experts. Empowering them. Yeah. I believe being Latino, um, when I decided to do mental health as a career, it wasn't as big as it is now. My parents would question me, it's like, are you sure you want to do this? It's like, what type of career are you going to be able to get? It's like, is this going to maintain you? And I remember just being like, I don't know. I really don't know, but I want to help people because I believe we need it. I think there's, you know, in as a Western culture, when it comes to therapy, it's an individual thing, one on one. However, in real life, we're all interconnected. There's family, there's neighborhoods, there's culture, there's, the big external systems. We all play into it and it all interacts. So sometimes when we have mental health issues, when we have stress, when we have depression, it's not just us, but what's going on around us. And that's what I try to bring into therapy. It's like, what's going on around you that's affecting you right now? And normalizing that maybe the work that you're doing is very stressful and it's creating this for you. And that's okay to feel that way.
Yeah. I can say that, entering into this relationship with the cultural differences that we've had, I can say that through my life, I've tried to do a lot of work on, like inner work on my privileges and recognizing how those have given me certain opportunities in life, and yada, yada, yada. But I will say that entering into this relationship has been some of the most confronting, aggressive, kind of dismantling of my inner biases. Like the ways in which I get to recognize the differences in how our lives have been and in the ways that we think and in the things that we value, right? Like in my family world, right? Status and appearance, and education, right? Like those are valued much higher, right? Like how much money you make, what kind of house you have, what you look like on the outside to others really determines a lot of how successful you are, in my family culture, and probably in many family cultures where there's middle upper class type vibes. And then in his when I'm with him and kind of learning about him and his culture, right? Like family is at the top, and it's I think that's amazing and beautiful. And I definitely get butthurt when his family calls him every single day, and like I have to like beg my family to like talk to me. But there's also been a lot of challenges though. Like I would say the biggest challenges are around like socioeconomic status differences and the ways in which I'm like, oh, this is easy and this should be simple and blah blah blah. And then there's more tension than that. And yeah, just I feel like I've been really, really confronted with a lot of the ways that I still hold biases around my culture, and it's been very humbling. It's tough work, but it's such important work, and I'm very grateful for it. And I know that it's really drastically deepened my therapeutic practice, because I do work with a lot of folks who are not white, who are not upper middle class, right? Like I really, my perspective has been deepened, it has been broadened, my level of understanding of the ways that culture impacts the systems in which we live in and how they impact people differently has increased so much. And I'm never going to be an expert, and I'm always going to be learning. But he teaches me a lot about that. And I will say that it is amazing that there are people like him in this world who are choosing to be therapists, because the world needs more therapists of color. The world needs more male therapists. The world needs more therapists who come from diverse backgrounds that can more deeply understand and advocate for their communities in ways that we, as like the number one type of therapist that you'll find is like white women, from upper middle class backgrounds, because it's expensive to go to school to become a therapist, which is a whole nother topic. And we can try our best, and hopefully we are trying our best, but the world ultimately needs therapists of diverse backgrounds. So it's awesome that he's here.
Well, I really appreciate that. I'm blushing right now. But yeah, I mean, she's mentioned it, being in this relationship has really brought out a lot of biases, even on me, right? A lot of sequela as to, being someone who just grew up in his Latino community, never realized that I had some, I guess, those ceilings that we talk about where we limit ourselves and striving for more, and being like, oh, this is what I felt internally about this Western culture, as I'm seeing it more present and being like, whoa, this phones me back, and it's like, and I'm not the only one who feels held back this way, and this is what I bring into therapy and being like, this comes up, something that got me into therapy is just learning about learned helplessness, right? About, it's like, that's the most limiting thing where we learn, once we learn helplessness, we kind of create a ceiling, right? And how to unwind all that. I'm trying to come up with an example. Most of the kids, young teenagers I talk to, are in low socioeconomics, living in some not so safe environments, and they've either had to witness something or forcefully be a part of something, which then defines them and their personality. Their trauma defines their personality, right? There's individuals who are scared to leave the environment because they think they're part of this environment. And when they meet someone who's not part of the environment, they feel less. They don't pursue deeper relationships because it's like, this is who I am. And once they see who I am, they're not going to like it. But the reality is, like, your experience is not you. But you did experience this. And look how you survived this. Yeah, I don't know. I probably went off the tangent right there, but hopefully that makes sense.
I think that was a very relevant tangent because it reminds me in some ways of how growing up in a low socioeconomic background as well, like I resonate with the idea of learned helplessness and just certain stories I heard from my parents about what it takes to make money. Like for me, the biggest one was that earning money is painful. That requires backbreaking work, that requires overextending yourself. And once you stop working, there's no end to working. That's the thing. Like you work and then you keep working and then you keep working and then maybe you have 10 minutes, but like you keep working. Like there's no time to take a break. You're constantly working until frankly you die. And that's a sad story I've had to unwind and pull apart and realize that no, that's not the only way of existing and being, but it's the dominant story that I grew up with. And it's something that I've had to confront when, I encounter other people like my ex, like other people out in this world that have been challenging me to see things differently. But that idea of like learned helplessness is it's very true. And it's interesting how it can just like persist over time. Like even if like we are like conscious of it, right? To like let go of it. And as Lezah said, to actually do the work. So I guess segueing off of that, I know there's a lot of different ways to think about doing the work, but what are some ways you two think about doing the work, both within your relationship as well as supporting your kind of clients and patients?
The work is mostly awareness, I would say. Because once you have awareness, then you can make choices. When you are living your life in an unconscious way, which basically just means that you do not have awareness over what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're doing, and how that is all conditioning. Like we think there's like this statistic that I don't have, so I'm just going to make up numbers, but we think like 800,000 thoughts a day. It's not that number, but it's something really big like that. And something like 90% of those thoughts are repetitive patterns that just continue over and over and over again. And we can live our entire lives just in this kind of trance of our conditioning, like the stories that we were told about who we are, what life is, what it all means, what relationships are, and all of that. And we're really just living as a reaction to the things that happen to us. We don't really make a choice about how we're going to react. We just react. And so I think that doing the work is doing the best you can to slow down your inner process so that when things happen, you develop this connection with your body, this connection with your internal world to be like, whoa, something is coming up for me right now. And it is charged with so much emotion. And I just want to scream and I just want to punch the wall and I just want to run out the door and say this relationship is over because I'm triggered and my automatic is to escape, right? So that's living in a way that is, like that. Okay, so now I'm just going to speak like from experience here. So, talking about our relationship and stuff, for some people, being in a loving relationship is natural. It's easy. It feels safe because their experiences in life have been to be safely loved and know what it's like to have someone care and support them no matter what they're feeling. And they can trust that I'm okay, I'm lovable, and if I reach out for help, if I ask for support, then I will most likely get it. That is a privilege that many people have. It's like one of the untalked about privileges is having a healthy, stable relationship with your family. And then for many, many others, that was not the case. And they learned that there are conditions that love can be painful, that love can be violent, that love can mean being rejected or criticized or judged or hurt. And trying to figure out, how do I need to be in order to stay in connection to these people that I depend on, to my family, to my community? What parts of myself do I need to banish or hide or mask in order to stay in connection? Because as human beings, our safety depends on our connections and our belongings to our tribe. So I personally grew up in that second way where, I can say that, my parents did the best, but intergenerationally, love was also painful. And so I built, defensive systems inside of me to defend myself against real vulnerability and real intimacy, because I learned growing up developmentally that real intimacy puts me at risk for being hurt. And so here I am in this relationship where we both are deeply desiring deep intimacy and we're committing to that. And, for the longest time I thought, if I find the right partner, then love will be easy. And I have learned that once I find the partner, then the real work begins, because it is easy to go from partner to partner and just to stay in that honeymoon phase where it's just the flood of good chemicals and things are exciting. But once things get deeper and I'm required to open myself up in a more and more vulnerable way, I become triggered by that. It becomes scary to my nervous system. Like, danger, danger, don't open up to this person because you will get hurt. And so that continues to happen for both of us in different ways. And so for me, doing the work, going back to your question, doing the work means that when I suddenly get flooded with this urge to fight or run away or shut down, I have to slow down what's happening, pause, look inside of myself and have a moment with myself where I'm like, what's going on right now? Where is this coming from? What part of me is wounded and protecting itself right now? And is that really the choice that I want to make? Because if you pause and if you bring awareness to what's happening, you can still make the choice to react in that way. You can still make the choice to run out of the house and go, cool off alone. You can make the choice to yell. You can make the choice to throw something, right? Which I don't do.
No, there's no way have you done that?
You can make the choice, but it's a choice, and that's the important part. You can also make the choice to take deep breaths and say, like, let me be vulnerable right now. Let me tell you that right now I'm triggered, and right now I'm scared, and right now I'm hurting, but I want to continue to show up in this moment for this relationship. What can we do? And we have done that so many times, and it's not a pretty process. It's really painful. It's really hard. It's really scary. But I think over time, we continue to just do it. We continue to just commit to, we're not going to let these conflicts go in the same way that they've always gone from our histories. Like, we're going to do something different. We're going to make a different choice. No matter how scary it is, And ultimately, that builds trust, and that builds this new belief about relationships where like relationships can have conflict and it's going to be okay. There can be conflict in a relationship where you don't get injured or wounded, where instead you can actually grow closer and get to know each other on a deeper level because you're opening up about what's triggering you and what's wounded and what part of your past is coming up in the present. And that is a complete shift in perspective. And that's teaching, my nervous system that we don't have to be so afraid of intimacy. We can begin to open to it. And it's slow, but that's what doing the work is. Doing the work is slow. It's continuing to show up. It's continuing to make a choice. It's continuing to bring awareness and compassion to what's happening inside of you. And it's continuing to practice new ways of being that might feel scary, but without practice, they're going to remain scary. The more you practice something, the easier it gets. And that's kind of what my view of doing the work is.
I think I'm just going to repeat almost the same thing that Lezah did. I think awareness is the first key, awareness of who you are in this world. What are these feelings that are coming up and why are they coming up? Because there's always a reason that we're sad. There's always a reason why we're angry. There's always a reason why we're confused sometimes, right? Awareness is the first key to being like, this is who I am in this world. This is who she is in this world, And then comes acceptance. Acceptance that this is me. This is why I'm feeling this way. I may not be living a congruent self compared to what other people's expectations are. Because in this world, there's so many other people, and each individual has an expectation. And whether it's directly or indirectly, there's an expectation on it, of who they would probably wish you to be. Parents are the first ones, when they before having kids, it's like, oh, my kid's going to be this, my kid's going to be that. And then they grow up, they're teenagers, they're young adults. It's like, they're not following what I expect. Right? So it's this acceptance. It's like, I am who I am. I accept my feelings. I accept what I like. I accept my values, regardless of what others want, which I call the unconditional regard. Like, no matter what I do, I'm going to love myself. No matter what she does, I'm going to love her. Right? Whereas, like, releasing expectations, but also accepting that we're human. We might have expectations of how much are we going to lean on expectation just instead of leaning on acceptance. Can we accept the other person right next to us for who they are, right? Their real selves. And I think through that acceptance comes that compassion for yourself and for other people, because you start accepting that as like, it's normal to be upset and annoyed sometimes. Or it's normal to just laugh out of silly things that were unexpected, which then you get to see other people outside and be like, oh, I see why. I can understand why they're feeling this way. And I think, but being accepting isn't so easy, We are very self-critical of ourselves just as individuals, right? Physical appearances, way we think. Oh, most of us have issues listening to our own voices and recording because there's this self-critical part of our brain that, it's not something to expel or hate, but come to understand that it's trying to resolve things. It's trying to problem solve things, even though there's not a problem.
I think that like self-criticism really comes out of wanting to belong. And usually the inner critic is the internalized voice of the people that you wanted to belong to the most. And, usually that's family, or it could be peers or community, right? So whatever you were criticized for, whatever you were rejected for, oftentimes that becomes your inner critic.
And accepting that inner critic and probably training it, practicing, that's also the word. Practicing that inner critic to be a little bit more gentle, to define itself as to why it's doing this. And maybe becoming more of an ally than a parasite, because sometimes our negative thoughts take over, and it can't be helped sometimes, and it's even that is normal. Understanding is like, oh, I'm having a hard time, bringing into understanding this, right? That's when we are incongruent with ourselves, where we're dealing with this social expectation, this external expectation, when it does not align with our own values and our own expectations for ourselves. So it's the work to see that and still be like, yeah, I want to be congruent to myself, to my values, to my dreams. And I'm willing to go through all this to just be me.
I think like just one more thing, kind of making more clear this language around like what is the true self and what is the conditioned self, right? Because I think many of us have never truly met our true selves. I think many of us have only really experienced ourselves through our conditioning, and through the thoughts and the beliefs and the behaviors that are automatic, and that are just kind of programmed in for our survival. And so I think that also kind of the goal of doing the work is to make contact with the true self. And I would describe the true self as the very whole part of, like, the whole, it's whole, it's not broken, right? Like our conditioned selves might be broken. We might be so wounded, so traumatized, so, cruel and abusive and addicted and all of the things. But there is a part of us that is whole and that is capable of accessing love and compassion and kindness. And that's my belief, that's not everyone's belief. I think that it really ties in spirituality and this idea that we are more than just our individual selves. We are all connected. And I would say that the true self is the part of us that knows that we're connected, that has that wisdom. And I think that accessing that true self, finding a way to embody that true self is the goal of therapy, in my opinion. And the goal of healing is like, how can we sort through the parts of ourselves that have wounds, the parts of ourselves that are just defensive or offensive, just protecting us, to the part that doesn't need to be protected because it's whole and it's unbreakable.
And yet, I would also like to add, and I think this is where I'm going to add a little bit of the existential theories, where it's like, you're always going to be working on that congruent self. Yeah. Always. You're never going to finish.
Right.
And that congruent self is going to change up. And you're going to be surprised when it does. And then you're going to figure out, it's like, oh, I'm not that congruent as I thought today. It's like, I guess I got to do more work. And it's, if we're going to find meaning in this world, we create our own meaning. And our meaning evolves day through day, Mm-hmm. So just because you start the work does not mean that once you finish it. This is going to be not the challenge, but the path of life. We're always asking ourselves, who are we? Who am I?
Yeah. So many nuggets of wisdom there. I think one thing I want to respond to immediately is what you were saying, Dario. Right? There's this constant questioning of like, who are we? Why are we here? And something I've recently come to terms with is the fact that my answer can change. And I was having so much trouble with that because I feel like after my own life fell apart and I connected with my spirituality and different healing modalities, I'm not saying this isn't a dream that I have, that I won't continue to have to a certain degree, but I think I'm starting to realize that actually I'm not sure if what I wanted is what I still want. And it was a little bit of a difficult pill to swallow because I realized I had started to build this identity around this is my dream and I'm that person who's doing these things to get to that dream. But then when I actually paused earlier this week, I was like, wait, but do I still want this dream? Does this still make sense? And just going back to what you were saying around doing the work is a combination of, well, most critically, that awareness, right? And then that acceptance. I realized what not enough people talk about is how uncomfortable it is to come to terms with the incongruencies, the multitudes within each of us, that we're constantly shifting and changing and unraveling. And the more we do this work, the more we unravel, the more parts of ourselves we see, the more, frankly, imperfect we realize all of us are, which I think is beautiful, right? But then there comes that, to your point, that very critical acceptance piece of like, okay, now that I see these things, see my condition, also potentially see and or embody my true self, my highest self, whatever you call it, how do I start to like make sense of all of that, make sense of the parts of myself that I've abandoned, while I'm bringing those home, while trying to make my way to embodying my whole self as much as possible.
You just bringing this up. I guess usually what I like to bring up or what I like to explore is when you had that moment, was there a moment of grief?
I think it was a moment of surprise, a moment of realizing that as much as I talk about the importance of slowing down for others, I don't do it enough myself. That's me being very honest in a somewhat critical, but mostly just like, wow, like I still need to do the work. I still need to slow down myself and make sure I'm not running. Because even today I realized that I wasn't necessarily running towards something, I was running away from something else. And it's very different to run away from versus towards something.
Oh,
That's deep right there. And yet I would like to acknowledge that you stopped for a bit, you paused and had that moment of surprise. You let that come in. So you did slow down, as you mentioned that this is a practice that you're doing.
Appreciate you. And Lisa, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned around relationships, which I really relate to, which is this idea that from seeing how my parents' relationships ended on early during my childhood, I feel like I also learned that being in a relationship was challenging, that being intimate would lead to incredible suffering, And so to hear you talk about how there's some, I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to continue to be triggered. Like, that is just like a truth of life. If we're especially committed to this path, it's something we need to accept. But I did want to acknowledge that. I did want to just acknowledge that, to your point. I think so many people put relationships and healthy relationships on specific pedestals, or they define them in certain ways that disallow for conflict, disallow for moments of discomfort. And I really appreciate you normalizing that even in this loving relationship. And because probably it's loving, right? You're able to navigate and rewrite these moments where you're being triggered and working together to shift that.
Yeah, it's a big trip for sure, to kind of bear witness to those moments when both the parts of myself that are triggered and the part of me that is being aware of the fact that I'm triggered are present. And, it's kind of like this inner dialogue. Well, one part of me will be like, screw this, like I'm out, like this is too much, like I can just do this on my own, I don't need nobody. And then to kind of have this other one like, you're triggered right now, like it makes sense, you've had to be really hyper independent, you've had to take care of yourself, like it makes sense that right now when there's this feeling of disconnection, that's making you feel like you have to go and do it alone. But is that really what you want? Because I know you love this person. I know you do. And then the other person, oh, fuck love. Like, I don't. Like, it's just kind of this back and forth. But it's so interesting because it's like, all right, which part am I going to act from? And sometimes it's a little bit of both. But yeah, it's it's interesting, and this is, you know, unique to our relationship. I'm sure that there are relationships out there that do it differently, and maybe even more healthfully. But yeah, I can say that this is the first relationship where the conflict hasn't, like, the conflict has led to a deepening rather than a distancing. Because usually the pattern of my relationships is that I just try to be as perfect as I can be to avoid conflict. And eventually that leads to me being someone completely different than who I truly am, and repressing a lot of my needs and repressing a lot of my emotions. And eventually I distance myself from the relationship, and I sabotage the relationship because I'm not feeling myself. I'm not feeling whole. I'm not feeling complete. I feel like I'm living a lie. And so there's this pattern of avoidance of conflict, that actually results in deep inner conflict, um, which is ironic. And then, you know, in this relationship, it's, you know what? If there's something off, we're going to talk about it. We're going to bring it to the surface. We're going to explore it. You know, we're going to share from the heart what's coming up for ourselves and be truly vulnerable. And that has been so, like I mentioned before, scary, so different from what I'm used to. There was never that in my family growing up. You know, like my family, if we're all home together, we're like in completely different worlds almost, right? There was never this, let's talk about it. Let's find a way to connect and repair whatever ruptures there are. It's just like, oh, there's ruptures, get away. You know, and so now it's like doing the opposite of that is so healing. So healing. I feel myself being healed more and more every day by it, because yeah, just to be loved even when I am honest about my needs, and I do say like, hey, I don't like this, or hey, this isn't working for me, or hey, XYZ, to say that and then to be heard rather than to be criticized, even though, you know, it doesn't mean that there's no conflict, right? Like sometimes there is conflict, but we get through it, and that's really different, and that's really special. And so yeah, I guess it changed my mind, because I just figured that I would eventually find someone where there would be no conflict. And that would be how I would know that it was like the right relationship. But actually that's not the case. Actually, it's who can I finding someone where there's conflict, but that conflict is a pathway deeper into love. Yeah. And it allows me to be fully honest. Like, I don't think I've ever been as honest about who I am with someone than with him. Like, seriously. And it's crazy. The things that I've told him that I thought I would never tell anyone else. I've, like, when we've been kind of talking through things, like, I've shared with him things that I didn't even know about myself. It's like a truth springs forth that I wasn't even aware of, but it feels safer to share those parts of myself with him than it does just to journal about them alone, because I can trust that he'll hold me and accept me. When I don't even trust myself to hold myself and accept myself sometimes. So that, yeah.
I want to respond quickly. Just, I love what you said, that for you too, conflict is a pathway to further deepen this commitment that you have to each other versus this distancing. And I've noticed that in certain relationships that I have, where it gives us this opportunity to have a very honest conversation and, you know, talk to some of the wounded parts of ourselves. And I know that it is possible, to your point, Lezah, and I hadn't really thought, you, like, literally this light bulb went off in my head, where I do truly have certain relationships where it does feel as safe, or if not safer, to actually speak my truth to someone that's capable of holding me. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious for both of you, and it can be within the scope of this relationship or not, what feelings, sensations, or maybe even call them green flags, you look for that would indicate to you that that person's capable of holding you? that that person is someone that you would be able to walk down this path with? And I know it's not necessarily a straightforward answer, but I'm really curious, you know, how you think about that, how you think about, okay, given that this has happened or these things have happened, I trust that we can go deeper.
I mean, if I could say, you know, what made me really feel comfortable in this relationship is one that she saw me. That's the first thing I noticed. Like she sees me, right?
How did you know that I saw you?
Oh
Yeah,
my
Lezah
God!
asked
I
me.
mean,
I was gonna-
you know, from the day that we met, you know, she had her eyes on me right away. I'm like, whoa, you know, so much attention, you know.
Don't listen to that advice. Don't trust anyone that gives you attention, okay?
No, but authentic attention, you know, like authentic curiosity is where she has like, wow, she's curious to know who I am, where I come from, you know. She's willing to see a part of my world that she may not know about, you know. She is willing to adapt to my things, you know, as long as it's not a sacrifice for her, right? Because it's also something that's we have to compromise. That's part of a relationship, right? But it's not a big sacrifice where it's like this is gonna take something away from her, you know, or take something away from me, but more of a middle ground of okay, we have differences, you know. She accepts my differences and the growth that I'm trying to make. She knows the path that I'm trying to take, the places where I'm trying to grow, and she's always been a support. You know, she's you know, seeing my drawbacks already. You know, it's been almost 2 years together, so she just had to see some of my flaws already. You know, but yet she accepts it. You know, sometimes our own triggers interact, and you know, it gets difficult. But I always see her getting grounded again, and being there, trying to hold. You know, where it's like, oh sure, you know, she's putting her part. She's putting that one step in the middle ground
Yeah.
because she cares, you know. Um, she accepts my flaws and then it's okay to still go along with it, you know, knowing that I have the intention of growing, you know, because there's another thing of going along with something when someone's not putting the work,
Yeah.
you know. And yeah, that's how I got to see it's like this is a person. We have our differences. We may clash sometimes, but we're always going back into the middle, taking that step halfway each other to meet each other. You know, I think at least for me, part of the fun of a relationship is working through these differences because we're always going to have differences with other people, always. You know, and some are compatible differences, and some aren't, right? And I've been lucky to have some compatible differences with her where I get to grow and learn from her and be like, oh, there's a new way of doing things. Oh, I never thought about this way, but it works. It's
It
making
does
me a
work.
better person.
My way works.
Sometimes.
like, oh, the things.
No, but, you know, feeling comfortable and safe is the main thing. Whereas, like, when you do have those moments of, you know, scorched earth feelings where it's like, I just want to destroy everything, that person's there, you know?
Yeah. I would say this is kind of where it's really awesome to date a therapist comes in, because going into this relationship, I knew he was a therapist because we worked together. And so there's kind of this level of therapists, our job is to be that person who's safe to share your inner world with, right? So I already knew that this is someone who knows how to be safe for other people as they share their inner world. This is already someone who practices every day accepting and being non-judgmental and being compassionate for other people as they kind of share their deepest parts. So there was already kind of that built in a little bit. I think that, you know, not everyone is lucky enough to meet a therapist man, and you know, it makes it a little more challenging out there in the real world. But I would say that it's really important to get to know your body's signals of safety versus danger. And this can be really difficult if you've experienced trauma, because your body's signals are like really intense, and they might perceive danger when there's really none, and they might perceive safety when there's really danger, depending on the nature of one's trauma. So for me, it took many years of having to get to know my intuition, and being able to really check in and feel, am I safe right now? Is there something that feels off? And trusting them, you know? And I think so it's really an embodied feeling of how do you know if you're safe with a person, is just really this embodied sense of, if I'm vulnerable, then this person can meet me there. And I think one of the biggest telling signs is this person being vulnerable with me. You know, I can really just paint the picture of when there is conflict, there really does feel like there's, this big distance between us, and one of us will very bravely and courageously take a step closer to the other person and say, hey, I know you're upset and I'm upset too, but I'm taking a step in for this relationship, and I'm moving towards you, and I'm letting myself be vulnerable. I'm bearing my heart. And that's when, like, it doesn't matter what kind of conflict it is, like, it's the moment that one of us decides to be vulnerable that we can move into the repair. But it's a risk to be vulnerable, and I think you have to start small. You have to share little pieces of yourself with another person and see how they take it, and then trust that what they show you is what they're capable of. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means that they can only tolerate so much vulnerability, and if they can't tolerate your vulnerability, then it's probably going to be disappointing for you to continue to try to be vulnerable with that person, and potentially dangerous for you to be vulnerable with that person. In our getting to know you phases, we really were kind of just sharing our life stories with each other. We were just sharing bits and pieces of our life, and I would share one thing in my life and he would share one thing in his life, and we kind of just built this foundation of like, okay, we're really opening up to each other. And slowly we've continued to open up deeper and deeper to parts of ourselves that are now, I feel like I've begun to work with some of my most wounded parts within this relationship, that I could never have ever felt safe in previous relationships to explore. And it's still scary, like I'll still like try and talk to him about certain things, and I'll just freeze up for like 5 minutes, unable to speak, because I feel so afraid of the vulnerability that I'm trying to enter into. And he'll just be there, and he'll just be like, take your time, I'm here, and so it's an embodied feeling. You gotta get in touch with your intuition. You gotta begin to recognize if you tend to feel attracted to people that are actually really dangerous for you. And the reason for that is probably because that's what love looked like. That's your blueprint of love. That's what feels familiar to you. And it can be a really challenging process to begin to kind of untangle yourself from that, from kind of the imprint of trauma. But it's really important work to do. And that's why I think talk therapy is dope, but I think that it takes more. I think somatic therapy and types of work, healing work that are inclusive of the body's wisdom and kind of feeling into what is arising within the body can be really, really powerful, especially if you experience trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, she mentions stepping into vulnerability, right? And I'll be honest, she does most of the stepping in. Because even though she's been talking about me being a guy therapist, I still shut down. As a guy where I was like, I don't want to talk about my feelings. Although I'm feeling it, I don't want to talk. And it's kind of a critical moment. Seeing your partner step into that vulnerability. And then I have to make the choice. So it's like, am I going to be stubborn and hold all these feelings and just or be vulnerable as well and step in with her, And I think that's one of the toughest things too, where in your emotions, you're defending, you're guarding yourselves from being more hurt, And when your partner steps into vulnerability, you may not want to or may not feel ready. And when you don't step in to that vulnerability, it does rupture a relationship a little bit because here's your partner who stepped into vulnerability and was left without any support. And it's nothing bad with the other person, right? But that communication matters. Whereas like, hey, right now I'm still feeling my feelings. I'm still trying to process this. I don't have the words for it. Can we come back later? Because for me, it's still tough to talk about feelings, or just to even label my feelings as to sadness or, anger, stubbornness, So it's like, even though you may not be ready to be fully vulnerable, that communication of being like, let's have some more time. Can we visit this later where, my emotions are more organized in my head, right? Because as a guy, I try to I'm way too rational, logical with talking about emotions that, if I'm in a vulnerable spot guarding myself already and she steps in, my conversation would be logical, defending my feelings at the moment. Or maybe 2 hours from then, I may be more open to being vulnerable and being like, yo, I was feeling this because it triggered this part of me. It made me feel, for example, abandoned, you know, and it's sometimes time and showing up. Communication matters into being like, I'm not ready at this moment to step into this vulnerability, but can you come back later? Or I'll come back later.
This dance of self-regulation versus co-regulation, sometimes you need another there to help you regulate, and that's called co-regulation. And then other times you just need to self-regulate before you can enter into any type of vulnerability with another person. And it's just, you just got to know yourself. You got to be aware of yourself and what you're capable of, what your capacity is in that moment. And he mentioned the being a man thing, which, I do think that, there's a lot of conditioning around gender, whatever someone was, what's the term that I'm looking for? Like whatever someone was raised as, regardless of what they identify as, that plays a huge role on how we process our emotions, how we share our emotions, or what qualities and traits we feel comfortable or uncomfortable with. And I think that we can really be having awareness of that in relationships can be really helpful too. And yeah, I think that those of us that feel more connected to vulnerability and to our emotions and to our emotional intelligence can be leaders to those who struggle with that more. And yeah, I would say that I had to do a lot of work though before I could be a leader, because in terms of like vulnerability, because like it's really scary, to be vulnerable if the other person may or may not respond to that. But I think overall I do trust that he will eventually respond. We've had so many fights where we're like not talking, but we're like sitting next to each other and we're both like, we're angry at each other, but we're not leaving. And I think that's kind of beautiful. Yeah.
It's kind of beautiful. And I have to say, Lezah, I've only seen like a part of your journey, but I'm so proud of you for leaning in and leading with vulnerability in this relationship and other relationships, including with the one that we have. And I think something both of you mentioned around the importance of leading with vulnerability, but also knowing the amount of vulnerability to lead with.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I've realized. Just because I want to lead with a certain degree of vulnerability, and I like to call sometimes my flavor of vulnerability is opening the floodgates. That is not at all appropriate for everybody. For some people, it is very much, well, for some situations and people, they're just not capable of holding that much, nor do I feel like it's necessarily productive. So it's been interesting for me to go from somebody who's been very guarded to someone who's very willing to lead with vulnerability, but also realizing that I don't need to lead with the same level of vulnerability with each person, because sometimes there are certain like milestones or what have you that are important to look out for, to just gut check whether or not like that is the right person to share this level of information with. But I I appreciate what both of you said around the importance of when someone does lead with vulnerability, you have a choice. Like, do I choose to stay? And you don't necessarily have to lean in all the way, but it's like, do you choose to kind of engage in that at some point? And even just like sitting next to each other, silently fuming, but just knowing that, you'll want to talk about it at some point. You'll want to kind of reconnect. I think that's so healthy and so important.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's worked out for us.
I'm glad. On the note of relationships, how have your definitions of love evolved? Like, what does it mean to love yourself, and what does it mean to love another? And I'm also wondering too, since I know just a little bit of context for folks, like Lezah and I met at an ayahuasca retreat in Peru last year. I'm wondering if there's been some sort of spiritual connection as well, or like how you think about spirituality in the context of your relationship, if at all.
Yeah. Such a good question. Such a good question. Definitely my understanding of love has completely transformed through this relationship. It's really become grounded rather than this dreamy fantasy thing. It's become really grounded, and I think that I really look towards nature for a lot of my spiritual understandings of things and of the world and of love. And one thing that I see in nature is this duality, this death rebirth cycle. And this is really something that I became very aware of during my ayahuasca retreat, is that you must purge. You have to go through this process of letting it all be felt and be released, and only in that process can you then access that feeling of like liberation and love and freedom and all those good feelings that feel so euphoric and feel so amazing. And I think that you can see that kind of everywhere, right? Like the fires will burn down the trees and then they will regrow, and the ash will fertilize the soil so that there can be new life. And our bodies they return to the earth as soil, and or nutrients to the soil and all of that. And the seasons, the moon cycle, our menstrual cycles, right? Like there's just all of these cycles in nature that teach us that it's not all blissful. It's not all happiness all the time. It's not all life and birth all the time. There has to be death. There has to be this process of constantly transforming. And so I think, with all that being said, I think that love to me has become this kind of container for which that process can continue to happen, right? Because constantly in our relationship, the wounded parts of myself are coming to the surface to be released. So that, I can continuously feel like a snake who's become too tight and uncomfortable in my skin, and then I can shed that skin and be born anew. And then eventually I will once again need to go through that process. And like you know, mentioned before we started recording, like it's just this constant process of transformation, and part of transformation is realizing that we've outgrown something and we need to change. And I think love is that container that makes that process possible, you know. And you know, because that process will happen regardless of if you have love or not, but when you have love you feel so much more safe to continue to transform, and the love itself continues to transform. You know, it continues to get deeper, and in order to get deeper there's this process of pushing up against the limitations, you know, like pushing up the levels of intimacy that I've been able to go in my life, and now I have to go deeper. Now I have to go beyond what I'm comfortable with, and that requires discomfort. But then once that discomfort is embraced and faced, there's this rebirth into something that's even more expanded, that's deeper, that's beautiful, that's amazing. And it'll continue to happen. You know, we'll continue to reach this point where it's like, oh, now we need to grow. Now we need to change. But love is that feeling of I'm choosing to grow with you and you're choosing to grow with me. And it's we're choosing to do this path together. And so yeah, I think it is super spiritual. That's how I see it.
Yeah. When it comes to love and relationship, I think, you know, to be in any kind of relationship, there has to be love, right? This choice of I'm choosing to be in a relationship with you, friendship, family, you know, intimate relationship, you know, you're allowing yourself to grow with this person, allowing this person imprint yourself on you. I think one of my biggest belief in relationships, at least in talking about family and those close relationships, is that as you grow, there's a part of them that's going to be growing with you. That's going to be part of you. You know, there's a characteristic, a personality trait, something about them that's imprinting on you, that's making you who you are. Something that, you know, I kind of, you know, think about every day is like sometimes I see my grandfathers as a part of me. I see my father, I see my mother, I see my sister, I see my brother. I'm seeing Lezah in part of my characteristics, you know, and to be in a relationship is accepting that I want this. You know, I want them to infuse some essence of themselves into my life, right? That even after they pass away, they're always going to be there. Their essence is always going to be part of this, of my heart. You know, I like talking to my clients about the heart hotel. You know, that, you know, there's always a room for every individual that we meet, you know, and that room is only going to be reserved for them. And there's so many spaces in that heart, you know, so I asked them to envision what's in that room. What did they leave in your heart that's still part of it, you know? And I think that's what it is, you know? It's like, what did you allow in your soul that you got from them, you know, and that you permit to keep on receiving, right? Because, you know, a relationship could continue. And even when it ends, there's still some growth. You know, my grandfather's passed away last year and 2 years ago. And I'm still learning a lot about them after their passing that I'm still getting inside of my soul that is like, oh, this is something I'm going to take in. This is something that's, you know, a tool that's a part of me now. And I think that's how I see relationships and love, where it's like, I want to experience this world that is random and unpredictable, you know, with you. Because like in the nicest, through thick and thin, like that saying goes, you know, when the ice is thick, it's nice, it's comfortable, but when it's thin, it gets uncomfortable. But I'm still gonna walk those steps with you, you know, as long as you want to walk those steps with me.
I love how both of you described love. It's so good. Yes, like to your point, Lisa, that like love really is that choice. And I guess both of you said this. Like it's a choice that both of you make, and you're constantly choosing each other and asking yourselves, you know, like, does it still make sense for us to navigate this randomness, this chaos together? And I think, Lisa, you're so right. Like when we do find that person or persons to share love with, it does make navigating the randomness of life, navigating the thick and thin, the ups and downs so much easier. And you're so right around how when we pause and we connect with nature truly is such an incredible teacher, as well as relationships. That's both of you have kind of affirmed over and over again, how when we actually pause and look around us, there are so many teachers available to us, whether it's nature, whether it's other people, whether it's our ancestors, and how we will continue to carry parts of them within our hearts in these like heart. I love the analogy of like a little heart hotel,
Yeah.
and how they're truly like there really is a room for each and every person that we meet, even if that person that we meet doesn't stay around for very long. But I feel like there's something to be learned, and we could obviously like close that hotel if we want, right? But I feel like something I've learned from connecting with like plant medicines and continue to walk this path of like working on myself is that it's so much more worthwhile to maintain an open heart and keep this hotel open 24/7 as much as possible, as opposed to like closing it.
Ugh.
And I think you just mentioned it. It's not always easy to keep it open, and that's where the work is at. Like that unconditional regard is like this openness, and this is gonna bring some good experiences.
It's going to bring good experiences, but it also means that you're opening yourself to the full completeness of life. And I think this is an important point, is that because we're so averse to suffering, because we feel, makes sense, right? No one wants to suffer. But because we guard ourselves so much from suffering, we close our hearts, and we're also closing ourselves off to love, and we're closing ourselves off to joy. One thing that I always like to think about is how grief, if we didn't love anything, we wouldn't grieve anything. And because we don't have very many containers to grieve in our culture, death is very feared. We don't talk about it. We, do everything we can to pretend like it's not going to happen one day and all of this stuff. Like let me see how to explain this. I experienced like a very traumatic loss of a loved one, and it was very sudden, and it happened, right, like one moment they were there and the next moment they were gone. And I remember, like, I've never experienced grief quite like that, right? Where just the world suddenly had no ground, and I was just like, absolutely, like my foundation was rocked. I was like, well, like, this can happen. Like, I don't even know how I can possibly carry on in life knowing that this is a possibility, that I might be faced with grief like this again. And it was a really big spiritual awakening for me to realize that, like, the reason why this hurts so bad is because I loved very deeply. And I have the choice of whether or not I want to close myself off to love, right? So that I don't have to feel this again, or whether or not I'm going to learn how to feel this, how to let myself feel the grief so that I can continue to be open to love. And if you want to be open to love, you've got to be open to grief. There's no way around it. The levels that you are able to embrace the pain of life are the levels that you'll be able to embrace the joy of life. And it's a spectrum that goes both ways. You can't have one without the other. And I think we try really hard. I think we try to just chase experiences that will give us that feeling of euphoria, that will give us that feeling of comfort. You know, we are a very addicted society. I have my addictions. You have your addictions. Like, we're all addicted to something that makes us feel okay and helps us to avoid our bad feelings. But the truth of it is that limits our ability to love. And so keeping the heart open is a choice to feel both love and pain.
She defined grief very well right there.
Yeah, you really did. I think about that a lot too, about how I'm at this point where it's been more than 2 years since I ended my last very serious relationship. And I've noticed within me a desire to guard myself from that grief, from that feeling of like, well, they disappointed me yet again. But that doesn't mean that love isn't worth it. It doesn't mean that it's not worth it to love another, but it's a matter of just gently reopening my heart and reassuring myself that it is still worth it to love. It is still worth it to connect with another because because death is an inevitable part of life.
Loss overall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, just in anything, it hurts to lose something. We love to gain, but
We
once we
do.
lose it, we're like, no, you
Mhm.
know? And it's because we enjoyed the experience. And I had a client who really got me, who gave me a good essence of grief. Where it's like, this individual is scared to start relationships because of the previous, experience. Where it's like, I don't want to create memories. I want to create experiences. Because I don't want these experiences to just become memories later, right? And it's because memories are things that we could go back to, but we're not experiencing it. We get to remember how joyful and good it felt, but then at the same time, we feel the hurt that's not present anymore.
It's that Buddhist concept of impermanence, you know, that everything is constantly changing, and every time something changes, there is a death of sorts, you know, where something is lost. It could be the most beautiful moment ever, but eventually it will be over. And then we have to grieve that. We have to grieve like 1,000 times a day. We have to grieve that our coffee is done. I know I grieve
Coffee's
that.
cold.
And then my ass goes and makes another cup of coffee, which I should not be doing, but it's because I can't accept the grief that this is done. The moment has passed. And that's a silly example, but you know, everything is constantly changing. And I think that's a really hard thing for people to embrace, hard thing for me to embrace. You know, and in regards to relationships, like we're both constantly changing on our own and together, and an acceptance with that is an important aspect of what makes a relationship work. Can you continue to flow with the changes and accept the changes, that this isn't someone that's going to be just permanently the same every day? One day they might be goofy, dancing with you in the kitchen, bringing your mood up. The next day they might be really making you upset and in a bad mood, and that is natural. You know, that's not something to feel afraid of.
And just to add to that, we were grieving our honeymoon period.
Oh yeah, the moment when we were like, "Oh, the honeymoon phase is over."
It's like, oh, this is you, huh?
Well, I'd love to wrap up this conversation with one last question for each of you. What do you hope for love and your understanding and embodiment of love in old age?
Oh my gosh. I've actually thought about this more often because, you know, my parents are aging pretty significantly. I mean, as everyone's are. But I feel like I'm really starting to see it. You know, my dad is much older. He's going to be 76 this month. My mom's turning 60, so they are officially getting up there to the point where their bodies are starting to become more limited. They start to look much older, they start to act much older. And so I've really been reflecting on that of like, wow, this is happening. Like it's happening. We're aging. And yeah, I think that is something that maybe other cultures honored a lot more than the Western culture does. I think the Western culture devalues our elders, whereas in other societies and cultures, elders are really honored and respected as kind of wisdom keepers. And so, anyways, a tangent. I hope that as I age, my heart becomes more and more open. It scares me because I know that I've yet to face the deepest pain that I will face. I know that I have yet to experience, like, I've experienced pain in my life. Like, obviously, I've experienced what I would consider to be deep grief, but it's really scary to think of the fact that, like, oh, I have seen nothing yet compared to what is to come. And so my hope for myself, my prayer for myself is to continue to ground into impermanence and the flow and the acceptance and the embracing of life's cycles, to continue to deepen my spirituality, because through spirituality I can remain in contact with what passes away from this life. I can retain a connection to my ancestors that are no longer with me, because I think ultimately that's a big part of getting older, is losing a lot of people, and losing your own abilities, right? Like your body can no longer do the same things, your mind sometimes slows down, and so it's not about getting attached to the way you are now, but recognizing that you're going to continue to transform, you're going to continue to change, you're going to continue to experience loss, but to try and see what you're also gaining. And I hope that as I age, I continue to focus on what I'm gaining. Like, what wisdom am I gaining? What love am I gaining? What, just I hope to just continue to learn and to continue to be open and to continue to love, even when things get hard, so that I end my life feeling very, very full of life, full of everything that it has brought, the good and the painful. Man, it's a heavy topic.
That's a beautiful response, though. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about that question, I think for me, it's always been a focus of lineage and heritage. And as I see myself as an older person, I hope to, whoever is the generation after me, to be able to give love, to show them that experience whenever they need it. Just as my grandfather passed on, that was my greatest fear. Not only of losing him, but understanding like the baton is going to be passed. That it's going to be, me next to create a definition of our heritage in our family. And seeing, two great people that held that baton and being like, I'm next. It's always been a goal to create that love and acceptance in the family and in society, really, to be that model of unconditional love, unconditional regard, of being able to see that whatever individual steps around me and being like, this is who you are, and I accept you. Because like, we may not always agree, and I may get annoyed, and you may get annoyed, but we can still sit in the same spot knowing that there's love, and showing and modeling that, really. That even though there's what seems to be ruptures, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be a rupture, that there's always a way to mend. It's just like there's ruptures and destruction in the world, there's also healing. We've seen things in nature heal themselves. And that's what a relationship is too. It's part of nature. So as an old age, just being able to show the resiliency in love, in unconditional regard, not only in my family, but wherever I can. I guess that's why I do therapy. Where it's like this is a space in which you can be you and be fully accepted, even though we may not always agree.
Yeah. And one last thing is just continuing to align myself with purpose, which can change. What I feel my purpose is now might be different than what it is when I'm older, but I hope that I never lose a sense of purpose. And I hope that I can allow my purpose to transform, right? I hope I don't get stuck on the idea that my purpose is to work. My purpose is to write papers, because right now that's like my goal is to be this therapist and to produce this research and to, write a book one day, right? Like I hope that I can move on from that when my purpose might be to be a grandmother or to like just grow a garden or to teach the next generation about what it means to be kind, whatever. Like I hope that I can allow that change of purpose. But I hope that I can always find a purpose.
Oh, that's such a beautiful way of ending. I feel like you both brought it kind of full circle to this point around like purpose. And right now, part of your purpose, or maybe like one of the purposes, right, is creating this safe space for other people to be their full selves and to allow them to like process, unpack, become aware and accept who they are and the impermanence of things, and to be in this place where you're living and breathing by example, just by being both truly who you are. What does it mean to love, to hold space, to lean in, to lead with vulnerability? I feel like you've left me and so many others who will listen to this so much inspiration in terms of what it means to live in alignment and to continue to do the deep inner work that will take our entire lifetime or lifetimes, if you believe in that. But it's truly so worth it. It's not something to be afraid of. So thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you for having us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm so excited to continue to watch you grow as you continue to share your beautiful, radiant light to the world. I feel honored that you had us on. Yeah, thanks so much.
Of course. And where can people find you if they want to connect with you or learn more?
Oh, so I guess we're going to do a shout out real quick. We both have recently transitioned to this new center. It's called the Curiosity Center. So if there anyone's ever interested, they can find us there. I would say, also our colleagues. I think I don't know if I could speak for you, but we have good, high confidence in our colleagues in that center as well. I don't want to speak for you because it wouldn't be right. But yeah, I think that's right now where you can find us. We also have a Psychology Today profile. My name is Dario Sarmiento.
My name is Lezah Pope. Yeah, you can find us on Psychology Today. You could email us. My email is just my name, lezahpope@gmail.com.
Mine's sarmiento.dario41@gmail.com, but I could definitely also give that information.
Yeah.
Through text.
Yeah. And you can follow my Instagram. I mean, it's not a professional Instagram. It's totally a personal Instagram. I want to make a professional Instagram, so maybe one day. But yeah, you can totally follow my Instagram. It's Lezah-Pope. I post every once in a while. You can message me because I'm on there a lot. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, amazing. Well, I will be dropping all the information in the show notes for folks that want to connect. But yeah, again, thank you so much. So excited for folks to listen to and engage this content.
Thank you so much.